In the very beginning of the semester, we talked about audience analysis and how public speaking is not about the speaker or the message, but it's instead about the audience. So there are three times that we need to analyze our audience: before, during, and after a speech. If you think about it, we spend the most time analyzing our audience before the speech because that's where we spend the most time working on our speech. So when you are conducting your research, working on your outlines, practicing your delivery, you should be analyzing your audience all throughout that process. There are three main things that we need to consider when we are analyzing the audience before the speech. First, there's demographic analysis. Demographics include characteristics such as age, gender, geographics, education, occupation, income. And demographics are a really great way to tailor your organization, content, and delivery to the audience. For example, if I was talking about healthy eating to a group of 10-year-olds, there are certain words that I would probably use and examples that I would use to relate to them. I also would change my delivery a bit. I might get down closer to their level. I might slow down, be a bit more energetic in my tone and delivery to reach that audience successfully. Whereas if I was talking to a group of senior citizens about healthy eating, that would completely change the type of words I would use, the examples. I might even change my delivery a bit, be a bit more formal since they are an adult audience. You do need to be careful with demographics, however, and be sure that you don't turn them into stereotypes. So just because members of the audience fit into a certain demographic, we can't assume that all the people in that demographic think, act, or feel the exact same way. An example of this is when I was in a women's business networking group. We would have these things called lunch and learns where we would eat lunch and have some type of speaker come and present a topic to us. Every now and then we would get a male speaker who assumed that because we were all women, that we all had young children, drove a minivan, and clipped coupons for the groceries. Unfortunately, I didn't fit into that, and I always felt like these speakers were a bit condescending to assume that I had these thoughts and feelings. Not only did I stop paying attention to those speakers, but they also lost a lot of credibility in my mind. We also want to conduct a psychographic analysis, and that includes everything that the audience thinks and feels about a topic. This includes values, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors, and needs. Now, values are expressions of things that we place importance upon, such as I value human life. A belief is something that we generally accept as true, such as I believe that donating blood saves lives. An attitude is an expression of like or dislike, such as I like the American Red Cross. And a behavior is something that is an observable action, such as I donate blood twice a year. The audience's needs are also a great way to figure out how to motivate the audience, and we use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to achieve this. At the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are physiological needs, such as food, water, shelter, sleep, all the things that we need in order to survive. On top of that, we have safety needs. Human beings like to feel like we live in a safe, orderly, predictable world. For example, you guys can wake up, get in your car, and drive to work or campus and not fear being hit by a roadside bomb. Unfortunately, there are places in this world where that is indeed a reality. On top of that, we have belonging needs. Human beings like to feel like we belong to some group. We belong to a family, to a group of friends. We belong to a culture or a country. On top of that, we have self-esteem needs. Self-esteem needs refer to how we feel about ourselves. We as human beings like to feel good about ourselves, like we're a good person, that we're smart, that we're intelligent, that people like us. And at the very top of the triangle are self-actualization needs. Self-actualization needs refer to our destiny. We like to feel like we have some type of purpose or some type of goal that we are working towards. We use Maslow's hierarchy of needs to figure out how to best motivate the audience. For example, if I was trying to convince my audience to donate coats to the Roanoke Rescue Mission, I could certainly tap into the physiological needs of how cold it gets here in the wintertime and how to imagine what it must be like to try and survive in such extreme cold temperatures. I could also tap into self-esteem needs. Doing good for others often makes us feel good about ourselves. Demographics and psychographics give us two views of the same person. For example, this woman here, from a demographic view, we can see that she's a female, that she's single, she's 34 years old and lives in New York. However, if we look at her psychographics, we can start to see the things that she's interested in, such as the music, the books, the TV shows that she watches. We can also learn about what her political preferences are or what church she attends. Next, we want to conduct situational analysis. This really goes back to that communication elements model that we studied in the very beginning of the semester. So we take a really close look at describing the whole physical environment, studying the channel and the way the message is being sent. We also look at the different types of noise that may be occurring in this speaking situation. We look at things like time of day, the size of the audience, and we also look at two new things, the type and disposition of the audience. There are two types of audiences, both a voluntary or a captive audience. A voluntary audience assembles out of their own free will. For example, if a band that you like is giving a concert here on campus, you like that band, so you come and you attend out of your own free will. Now, because you're a voluntary audience, you already like the band, you're interested in what they play, and they have a lot of credibility with you. So the band doesn't have to work that hard in order to meet your needs. However, a captive audience feels compelled to attend for some type of reason. For example, if I gave you extra credit for attending this performance, then you would be a captive audience member. You are compelled by that extra credit. Therefore, in this case, the band has to work a little bit harder in order to meet your needs. We also want to look at the disposition of the audience, whether they are favorable, unfavorable, or neutral. For example, if I have a certain position on healthcare and you guys as my audience are very unfavorable to that, I can't just come out of the gate and start shouting out my opinions. Because you are unfavorable, you're not really going to be persuaded to change your mind in such a short speech. Instead, I want to focus on the common ground between our two positions and speak to create understanding. Now, during the speech, there are also some things that we need to analyze for our audience. First, are they paying attention? You can easily see if the audience is paying attention by judging their nonverbal actions. Are they looking at you? What do their facial expressions tell you? If the audience isn't paying attention, how are you going to get that back? Perhaps you can use humor or ask a question to get them paying attention. Next, you want to see if they are understanding your message. Again, facial expressions are a good way to analyze whether or not the audience really is getting your information. If you see that the audience isn't understanding, you can always say things like, let me stop here and ask you guys a quick question to make sure we're on the same page. That little bit of verbal interaction will allow you to clarify any questions the audience has. You can also take a look at the audience and say, let me give you another example. By providing an additional example, you are further explaining the concept. Lastly, you want to see if the audience is accepting your message. Again, facial expressions are a good way to assess this. If the audience has a look like they're getting mad and angry, you know that maybe you need to back off your position a bit and instead focus on that common ground. Whereas if they are nodding their heads enthusiastically, you can see that they are on the same page as you, and you can go ahead and jump to your next point. The key component of audience analysis during the speech is eye contact. If you're not maintaining eye contact with the audience, you won't know if they're paying attention, understanding, or accepting the message. Lastly, we need to also continue analyzing the audience after the speech. So in the short term, the short few moments after you present your speech, you want to observe the audience's interactions with you to see if they understood the message and that they accept it. If you can see that the audience maybe didn't get the full picture, perhaps you can hang around for additional questions, or you can tell the audience that if they have any questions, they can email you or reach out to you. This will allow you to clear up any miscommunication. You can also analyze the audience long term. This is really helpful in professional settings. If, for example, you presented some instructions to coworkers, if they do not follow through with the instructions that you gave them, then you know that something broke down in the communication process. You also need to be a continued ongoing resource for the members of your audience. When they have questions, be willing to answer them. Always be a friendly, supportive team member. That will always help the audience know that you have their side. Another thing to do is to practice what you preach. If, for example, I asked you guys to recycle your cans and bottles and you saw me throwing my cans and bottles into the trash can, then you might think I was a hypocrite. So practicing what you preach is a great way to continue analyzing your audience. So how do you find out who is in your audience? Well, first you can conduct some research. If you are going to present at a specific organization, you can conduct a little research to see the type of demographics that are in the room. From there, you could start to make some assumptions about the psychographics in the situation. Talk to people. Even if it's just the moments right before your speech, this is a great way to get some background and insider information. And then you can weave that into your presentation as well. If you really are having trouble, just try to put yourself in the audience's shoes. You always want to ask the question, if I was in the audience, what would I want to know? What would I expect? What would I need from this presentation? By putting yourself in the audience's shoes, you can start to make sure that you are tailoring your message to those expectations and needs. And lastly, you can survey attendees. In the coming weeks, once we've approved our topics, we're going to conduct a little bit of psychographic analysis. So audience-centered speakers really carefully consider their whole audience and how they are going to accept their message both before, during, and after their speech. When you do this, you're going to become a much more effective, relevant, and engaging speaker.